The second one I would give you, and the people that are listening to this, is to think about the Parliament of Ukraine. So we all know that Ukraine is in conflict now with Russia. I don't want to talk about the politics; it's not for me. But the Ukrainian Parliament has kept meeting throughout that process, again during a time when the government has taken on incredible powers and when martial law was declared in Ukraine. But the Ukrainian parliament recognized it was even more important to keep meeting. And interestingly, the subject I'm going to talk to you about in your conference, post-legislative scrutiny, the Ukrainian parliament managed to go online, and its committees managed to review previous acts of parliament to see if they were working. And they managed to change all their rules of procedures to allow this.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this fourth episode of the Afripal dialogue. Today, we'll be talking about the evolution of parliamentary procedures, still in preparation for the Afripal conference that will be taking place in June from the 18th to the 20th of Hotel Africana in Kampala, Uganda. And we welcome you to visit our website and to register for the conference. To discuss with me this topic of evolution of parliamentary procedures is Steve Imrie, who is a clerk, one of the clerks at the Scottish Parliament, and who's served for a number of years with experience in parliamentary procedures and post-legislative scrutiny. Imrie, welcome to Afripal Dialogue.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And I believe Webele is what I should say to say thank you, at least in one of the Uganda languages.
Yes, in Luganda. Welcome. It's good to have you. And it's good to have you as part of the team that has been at the background, especially helping us during the scientific process of selecting the participants, especially for the session that we'll be having on post-legislative scrutiny. And we are expecting to have a number of them here with us, including members of parliament. And we're looking forward to a session that will be quite enlightening, especially with best practices and experiences that have actually happened on the ground with regard to post-legislative scrutiny. Today, however, I would like to talk about parliamentary procedures. It's something that, of course, is something we have heard about, an issue we've had being talked about. We obviously know there are procedures in parliament that guide parliamentarians when it comes to debate. What rules do they follow, when it comes to, for example, presenting a motion on the floor of parliament? Many times, I know in the African context, and you might have seen also in other contexts, where parliamentarians seem to have flaunted some of these, procedures, and people have wondered, when can they be held accountable, for that? And what is the role of parliamentary procedures, at the end of the day? But I think to begin first, in Africa, of course, we run a system that is largely inherited from colonialism. And some of the parliamentary procedures that we run are those that we handed down from the legislative councils that we had during colonial times. And then, of course, post-colonialism, to the parliamentary structures and legislative structures and assemblies that we run. Based on your experience, of course, from the Scottish Parliament, what is really the background of these parliamentary procedures in terms of their origin? How did they come into place? What was their rationale in guiding operations of assemblies of any nature?
Thank you. And let me just say it's a great pleasure to join with you today. It's my first ever podcast, Hannah, so I'm honored to do it for this important conference. So I was looking back when you asked me to talk to you about this at the the origins of rules of procedure, or what we call in a British context the standing orders
Mm,
of our Parliament. And the Scottish Parliament, or the new Scottish Parliament, has only existed for 25 years, but of course the United Kingdom Parliament in London is significantly older,
mm,
and their rules of procedure go right back hundreds and hundreds of years to about 1621. Was the first time that the rules of Parliament were ever put down on a piece of paper. And they were only 2,000 words long, but it was interesting to look at them because they set out really how that parliament was operating 500 years ago. You know, what was the role of the speaker? How was the seating arranged in the
mm.
chamber? How did they vote? What did they do if people misbehaved? So the rules of kind of procedure were, I think, really just the first time to kind of codify in a document how a parliament should operate. Because before that, it was probably just custom and practice, but
Mm,
that could change. And obviously, in more modern times, between elections, if you didn't have the rules of procedure written down and codified in a document, it was very difficult for anyone to control how Parliament operated, to allow everybody who was involved to participate equally, to know what they were doing. So I guess the reason was for codifying or writing things down and having standing orders written up was really to just provide a level playing field and clear understanding for everyone about how a parliament should operate.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the aspect of equality. And, in the day and age that we live in, parliaments have evolved from largely androcentric institutions to now include various minorities. Of course, with the introduction of women into, parliamentary structures and assemblies. But still, there seems to be a bit of some sort of inequality, especially when it comes to participation, and of course when it comes to rules of procedures. For example, can you say something about the aspect of plenaries? Say for instance during the debates, the idea of catching the speaker's eye, and of course during a debate, I mean presenting your motion, for example, and defending it, and of course there are instances where you may actually be shot down, by other by your colleagues, and that in a way could, make someone a bit shy, to get up again to say something, and consequently, of course, affect their performance as a legislature. So how do these rules of, procedure foster equality, especially when you have minorities in the group,
No, I mean that's a great question, and lots of different things we can discuss under that. So, for me, I'm not a big supporter, or personally, I don't think it works as well if you have a system that simply relies on elected members catching the speaker's eyes. It's very random. It's totally in the gift of speakers to decide, who to call and for how long, and
Mm,
what motions are selected, and what time is given for certain and matters. I mean, I can understand how some parliaments try to operate in that way, but in the Scottish Parliament, for example, our systems are slightly different. And that's because one of our founding principles is this one of equal opportunities and also sharing of power.
mm,
So our system essentially translates the proportion of voting share of votes that you have, the number of seats that you eventually end up with in Parliament,
mm,
into your ability to participate. So the proportion of the parliamentary time is split between parties with guaranteed rights for different parties to have debates, number of questions, seats on committees, all of these different things. And it also means that the speaking time for a debate is proportionally shared up between the parties. So that's instantly a way that the rules of procedure have this balance between all the individuals that have been elected to Parliament. And I personally think that that is an easier way, perhaps arguably a better way of making sure that everybody in Parliament can participate, and you're not just relying on catching the eye of the speaker. So that would be the first point. The second point, I think, comes down to, you were saying, some people maybe feel a little bit intimidated about standing up, maybe being shouted down and things like that.
Yes.
And then I think that question around conduct, around respect, around particularly speakers in parliaments, maintaining that decorum, making sure members are respectful of each other is critical here. So yes, I mean, politics should be a place for robust debate. After all, that's what parliaments are about. But it needs to be done in a way that is respectful for everyone, and no one therefore feels intimidated about standing up. But I think the third thing, and this is something that the Scottish Parliament has been trying to do, is you mentioned particularly women, for example, standing for Parliament. So let me just say a few things on that, and then happy to explore all of that with you. We started off in the Scottish Parliament with quite a good story when it came to women representation. So we didn't achieve 50-50, but we were perhaps high 30s, 40%. And it varied a little bit over our elections. But we didn't do very well when it came to Black and ethnic minority people, Asian people standing for Parliament. We weren't as successful there. So we've been trying to encourage political parties to look at their selection procedures, so they don't always select men for winnable seats. And we've been looking at the rules of procedure to see how we can help people with families, maybe younger people with caring responsibilities, for example, so that our sittings don't go on to the evening, to late into the evening. If someone is expecting a baby or has a young child, to allow them participate remotely, to have a job sharing scheme. So if you're the chair of a committee and you're on maternity leave, you can share your job with someone else for the period when you're on maternity leave, and then you come back, you take over your role. Or we have something called proxy voting. So you can allow your vote to be cast by someone else if you're unavailable, perhaps because you have caring responsibility or something like that. So I think there's lots of different things that you can use rules of procedures for to help with equality and participation within a parliament.
I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the aspect of, especially the feminine, workload when it comes to caring duties. And I know the Parliament of Uganda has also, led and pioneered it in that way by, for example, establishing a daycare at Parliament, of course, to cater for nursing mothers. And that, in a way, gives an opportunity to fully participate, during committee meetings or at plenaries. But of course, there's still the whole looming issue of sometimes the timing, of some of these meetings that, in one way, of course, in another infringes on, women's ability to be present, given their care responsibilities. But again, like you said, there's a way in which the rules of procedure can obviously be contextualized. But for me, I also like to talk about the aspect, when you talk about, for example, opposition, for example, there's the issue of majority and minority rule, still in the case of equality and ensuring that everybody is got an opportunity to voice, their concerns or on the floor of Parliament. And there's certain instances, or in most cases, where you see the government is obviously more than the opposition, and it becomes hard to to sort of create that balance, and in a bid to have their voices heard, there tends to be some bit of antagonism, that comes about. What do you think, would be one of the best ways in which, you could handle majority and minority parties, in Parliament, and especially when it comes to decision making and voting?
Yeah, no, again, a great question. I start from the principle that parliaments should be a place for robust debate, for argument, respect for argument, for clashes of ideas, because ultimately the parliament is a place where people are coming together to put forward their views, make their arguments, and ultimately decide on the laws of the land or budget spending or whatever. And my second kind of core principle is that a government that is elected by a majority, wins a majority of the seats, or manages to form some kind of coalition or something,
Yes.
but can maintain a majority in Parliament. It ultimately must have the right to take forward its agenda, okay? Because they have proposed their ideas. The people have selected them to take forward those ideas, and so ultimately that should be the kind of accepted process in Parliament. But in doing so, that government has to recognize that Parliament's job is to question them, is to make sure that their proposals are as best as they possibly can be, to challenge them, to hold them to account when things are not going well, why are things not working, etc., etc. So fundamentally, there is a balance to be struck between the government's right, because of an election, to have its agenda taken forward, and Parliament's ability to question, hold account, etc. And so this is where I think the rules of procedures are very important for the minorities here. So in the Scottish Parliament, we have a system in our rules that recognises on a proportional share of your seats how much time and influence that you have. So opposition parties have a guaranteed number of debates, a guaranteed number of questions to ministers, a guaranteed number of seats, a guaranteed number of chairs of committees. And this is one of our important principles, the sharing of power between the government and the Parliament, and in Parliament between the majority party and the minority party. So there's always an opportunity for the minority parliament, is guaranteed opportunity for minority parties to question and make their points, and the government cannot prevent them from doing that. And the role of the Speaker in the Scottish Parliament, we call our presiding officer, is to uphold those rules and procedures. I mean, that's a critical thing for us. And you mentioned, antagonism as well, Hannah. I think that's when things are even more important to have rules and procedures, is when things are in conflict or are antagonistic and heated, because then it's very important that everyone understands the rules of procedures, that you can explain what is happening to the media or the public. The presiding officer, the Speaker, can explain their rulings and their decisions on things. So I think it's even more important to have clear, understandable rules of procedure that protect minority participation in parliaments, especially during times of conflict.
Just a little bit about the rules of procedure and, in for example, adjusting them to the context. That a parliament is operating in. Of course, again, these are some of these procedures have been there for years, or perhaps generations. Of course, the old adage is, if it's not broken, then why, fix it? But I mean, moving with the times, of course, we, for example, live in a digital age, with a high influence of AI, and somehow we have to take some of these trends into consideration. And in many cases, they drive certain norms, and traditions obsolete. And you have to rethink, you have to reimagine how you operate as an institution, as a person, but then, of course, as a society, but then in this case, as parliament. So what are the ways in which you have seen, parliamentary procedure evolving over time, and especially in light of the current trends that we have?
Again, thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, we had the opportunity in the Scottish Parliament, of course, because we're only 25 years old as an institution, to start from very first principles and not necessarily to copy hundreds and hundreds of years of tradition from Westminster. And I agree with you. I think the standing orders of Parliament need to be regularly reviewed, regularly updated in light of circumstances, best practice, changing environments. They shouldn't be set in stone for forever, for centuries. If I give you kind of two opportunities, I was thinking about this question, kind of two recent moments in time, and I think encapsulate this. So one, I'm sure for Uganda, all of the other African states, it was the same as in my country when we had coronavirus, when we had the COVID outbreak. So that, I think, was an example when all of the parliaments around the world recognized that they couldn't work in the same way as they had done for decades before that. And we all needed to think about how we kept a parliament going when there were severe restrictions on our health and our ability to travel and be together. And it was critically important for parliaments to be meeting then, because, of course, our governments took incredible powers at those moments, because there was a public health emergency, to place restrictions on our civil liberties and the abilities of businesses to be open and things like that. And so, of course, we all moved into the more digital idea of a parliament, remote access and things like we're doing now. I think 10 years ago, 5 years ago, no one was doing Zoom, and now everyone is doing Zoom every day. And what's interesting for me is how parliaments adapted to that point, and how many, like the Scottish Parliament, have kept many of the things that we found worked during that time. So I think that's an example of responding to circumstances. And the second one I would give you, and the people that are listening to this, is to think about the Parliament of Ukraine. So we all know that Ukraine is in conflict now with Russia. I don't want to talk about the politics; it's not for me. But the Ukrainian Parliament has kept meeting throughout that process. Again, during a time when the government has taken on incredible powers, and when martial law was declared in Ukraine. But the Ukrainian parliament recognized it was even more important to keep meeting. And interestingly, the subject I'm going to talk to you about in your conference, post-legislative scrutiny, the Ukrainian parliament managed to go online, and its committees managed to review previous acts of parliament to see if they were working. And they managed to change all their rules of procedures to allow this. And so I was thinking about, isn't that an interesting example about parliaments in conflict, or parliaments perhaps where there has been a natural disaster, a flood, a wildfire, an outbreak of a disease, how important it is for rules of procedure to adapt. And then, critically, did we find it beneficial, and can we make those changes permanent for digitalization, AI, public participation, whatever the driver of change is.
No, it's very interesting that you mentioned parliaments and emergencies, which is also one of the theme of the Afripal 2025 conference. And of course, when we talk about emergencies, sometimes, of course, what quickly comes to our mind is the COVID-19 pandemic, but there could be other crises, could be a natural disaster, could be war. Just you mentioned the Ukrainian situation, but of course in Africa there's also situations of war, crisis, and where parliament cannot go on a break because there's a state of emergency that's been declared or something like that, and they have to figure out ways in which they can continue, and so of course that gets me thinking to parliamentarians and especially those who get into the institution and it's probably their first time in this institution. Of course, very few have, through the formal system, got to know about parliament and legislators and how they work, and it could definitely be a challenge to adopt to some of the rules of procedure, especially if you're coming from a different world, work world or corporate world. And of course that brings the aspect of learning. How do you constantly ensure that learning continues and parliament as an institution becomes a learning organization, but then its members are also able to get that knowledge, retain it, and still transfer it to others or to the new ones. What are some of your experiences with the Scottish Parliament?
Yeah, again, thank you for that. I think that's a very important point. So if I look at my own parliament, in my own experience, we have an election next year, in May next year, and we expect about 30, maybe 40 of the members of parliament to change. Quite a number of them are stepping down. That's 30 or 40 out of 130. So we're talking about quite a large proportion of members that are stepping down. And that's an opportunity and a necessity to talk to them in the beginning. So we have a large program of training and advice delivered by clerks and all of the other parliamentary services about what it means to be a member, how the parliament works, and critically trying to teach this belief that they are a parliamentarian, that their job, that they might be in different parties, but their job is to act to hold the government to account if they're in opposition or the governing party, because that's what the role of a parliament is about, and how to use the parliamentary procedures to do that, how to ask questions, how to talk in parliament, how to do a motion, what are committees for, how they work, etc. And I think you have to do that on a continuous basis throughout their career. You can't teach everything there is to know about parliaments in the first meeting. You have to do it over a long period. But I think the second thing that's interesting is using the experience of those new members to teach us how to maybe change or reform, because in their lives, in their other work, they've been maybe used to doing things in a different way that maybe we haven't thought of. So new members come with expectations. Why can't I do it like this? I used to do it like this in my other job. So I think listening to them and being open and willing to reform how we work a little bit. So it's a two-way process.
Yes. So I think as we come to the end, just a few of your thoughts, for instance, on especially spaces like Afripal that bring together practitioners, academics, parliamentarians into a space, create an avenue for them to have conversations, on ways in which they can improve parliamentary functions. Just a bit of your opinion on that and how this initiative could possibly transform parliamentary practices, not just on the continent, but globally.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great opportunity. I'm really, really excited about the opportunity to come. It will be my second visit to Kampala, so I'm looking forward to being there. And I think if we can all start from the principle of the importance of parliaments, what they are there for, what fundamentally are they trying to do, holding government to account, making sure everyone has their say, contacting the people outside of the parliament to hear their views, etc. If we can start from that and then share ideas about what works in our different institutions, what do our experts in universities and things think that we should be doing, if we can have that discussion and dialogue and critically make contacts with each other, I think we can start a conversation about reforms, and hopefully maybe we can improve all of us. What's the old saying we have in Scotland of a rising tide lifts every ship in the harbour? So I'm hoping that we can all learn from each other and then come home and think, I learned that about the Parliament of Uganda, we should do that here, etc. So let's.
Yes, thank you very much, Stefan. And we're looking forward to having you here in Uganda, in Kampala.
Likewise.
And we believe these conversations will not just stop here, but just like we plan for the conversations to happen every 2 years and in different locations, we believe we can be able to learn, while we are, in specific context, and to know, just see their challenges, see how they overcame them, and take whatever lessons that we can from there. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of the Afripal Dialogue.
Thank you, Hannah.
All right. Thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on our next episode. But please visit our website, afripal.org, and check out the content that is there. Please register. The registration is still open, and we look forward to welcoming you in Uganda in June from the 18th to the 20th. Thank you.